It's a people, it's a community, it's a life, it's a heart, it's a spirit.
The heck would you want a picture of a tattoo of $1,000 on your penile squares?
The medications that have now come out really make HIV a manageable disease.
Like I said, in today's market, real estate alone has gone up 15%.
Right, so sometimes there is no battle.
Yeah.
Lately, if I don't get my musket dirty, that's great with me.
The cops were pushing her and egging her on to get her nuts. They were calling her names.
And then I find that the actors and actresses, for the most part, are like sponges. They soak up whatever you get back to them.
And he kept explaining to me that I wasn't gay, that you cannot be gay.
Religion and spirituality are big, big topics these days. Right. I mean, the bookshelves, the bookstores are full of...
Incest, not funny. Midgets, not funny. Incestuous midgets.
Getting funnier.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Talking About. My name is Christopher DelGaudio and we'd like to welcome you this evening. Over the last 30 years, there's been a new awakening and an ever-increasing interest in psychic phenomena, the paranormal, and an overall leaning towards spiritual awakening and the esoteric knowledge. With us this evening is a professional lecturer, teacher, and astrologer, a practicing astrologer who is an expert in that field. And we'd like to welcome her once again. Her name is Arlene Merschat from Huntington, Long Island, and thank you for being here.
And thank you, Chris, so much for having me.
With pleasure. We'd like to talk within this episode about the events of the last week and a half or so. On the morning of September 11th, I know I awoke and it seemed like an ordinary day. It was beautiful sunshine, blue skies, and shortly thereafter, none of us, I think, were prepared for what we were about to face. And watching on our televisions, those who were fortunate enough to be watching this on television, and seeing something that could only have been interpreted as a movie. Before we proceed, I would just like to send, on behalf of crew and talent here at QPTV, our heartfelt sympathies to all the people who were involved in that incident, the heroic, valiant efforts of our rescue workers, the fire department, police department, healthcare workers, the politicians and government who has rallied together so valiantly to try to rebuild and pull us together in what seems to be a very, very dangerous and unsettling time. The question would be now, where does astrology, which some people might think has no bearing on an incident of such catastrophic measures, but how could astrology figure into such events, such as September 11th? And Arlene this evening is going to help us shed some light on that. In terms of the planet structures, was there something preordained that would lead up to the likelihood of such an incident?
Yes, amazingly so. I had mentioned once before that our collective humankind is affected by the planetary energies. And this was a definite example of that. I brought some material with me. I'm more of a natal astrologer than I am predictive, and that means I work primarily on a personal level with people who come in. And as I researched for the show and I thought about what we might discuss in this, so many things flashed into my mind. It's an overwhelming moment that none of us on this planet will ever forget. Yeah. No matter where we were at that time, and particularly those of us in New York, in this area, who experienced it. But what I think, as you said, we collectively have seen humankind in a different focus. We have, and I'm going to use some terms that people may react to in certain ways, but we have seen a world war But this world war has transcended a certain level of war because we now have a collective humanity looking at something, making decisions that before it will be over, I think we will see a different world. We no longer are singular and isolated. We are collective, and we are fighting for our lives in many ways. And I went back through some magazines. There's a magazine that most people who work in astrology now know. It's the American Astrologer, or the Mountain Astrologer. And this was an April-May issue. And people say, well, what do astrologers know? Why didn't they warn? Why didn't they tell us? And this particular article, which was entitled The Red Planet in the White House, Mars and the Presidency of George W. Bush, by an astrologer by the name of Jim Chauvin. He dealt with this particular cycle, and we'll go into it a little bit more because I think we have to look at astrology as it impacted in the president's chart, the country's chart, the city's chart, and in the major Saturn-Pluto opposition that triggered in at this particular time.
Okay, explain what the Pluto-Saturn opposition is.
Okay. Saturn-Pluto is a cyclical meeting of the planets as they make their progression through the sky, so to speak. This was a opposition that came in. It started actually in May. We began to feel the focus of it. And it accentuates the Mars in President Bush's chart, which it is the god of war. Okay, and it's going to be we're going to be involved with this, and again, I'm taking my own personal response to this, at least 2 to 7 years. Okay, there are energies that are going to take place that are going to be working through that will highlight this. And I particularly wanted to make mention of what Jim had said in the article, and he makes a quote, or he wrote this for Star IQ, which is a website Jeff Jower and Rick Levine, two very, very competent astrologers, have. And he wrote for their website. And I think this is something that, in retrospect, we can think of and can respond. I mean, I can't help but refer myself to looking at the television and watching the Howard Lutnick from Cantor and Fitzgerald in his extremely human compassion for his employees, looking at what went on in our city, in our country, and more than that around the world, because I think this is a different focus on war and the world that we're going to see. And it's a product that came through Saturn and Pluto, and if you're an astrologer, you can go back, and this particular magazine, if anybody's interested to read it, go back and see other times when the Saturn-Pluto opposition came in. And I'm going to read what he said. In typical terms of speaking about the president, who in this processing, as everybody has said, has grown. He, in many ways, I'm adding personal comment on this because I wasn't a person who voted for him. He wasn't my political choice. But as I've watched the man mature through this experience, we know that this was his destiny. And doing his chart, the United States chart, and this day, it just focused in so. And what I'd like to just read, if I may, is a quote from this. The international scene, W in Afghanistan. During W's term in office, there may well be military action along his Mars midheaven line in Afghanistan and Pakistan. This came out again in April and May, yes. The April-May issue. We are aware of the ongoing human rights violations by the Taliban in Afghanistan and their continued protection of terrorist chief Osama bin Laden. We tend to be less familiar with the dangers to Western interests in Pakistan. I'm leaving out some things. During W's term in office, he may judge it necessary to threaten or even use force in either Afghanistan or Pakistan, or both, in response to anti-American violence. Given the transits of Saturn and Neptune to W's Mars, I would expect these countries to become a focus of attention no later than the last week of June 2001, and then starting again in mid-December and on into the following year. There is some other explanations of how this ties in to his chart, to his destiny, to the destiny of the United States, and to all of us collectively. And I just felt that you can see the focus of astrology if you take and look at some of these things, and this was a good example. And if I may, you asked about Saturn and Pluto. This is, again, another article out of the Mountain Astrologer, this time August-September of 2001. And it's called A Crisis of Power. Saturn and Pluto face off, and this is written by Robert Hand. He goes on to say that the configuration that happens every 35 years symbolizes the breakdown of a power grid, okay? And on August 5th and November 2nd, 2001, on May 26, 2002, the planets Saturn and Pluto oppose each other, this time from Gemini to Sagittarius. This is a dominant configuration of the outer planets for the upcoming 12 months and will affect not only world events, but those of us with horoscope factors that are transited by this aspect. It goes on with some other things, but it seems effective at least a year on either side of the dates when the aspect is exact, August 2000 to May 2003. So in the President's talking about what we need to do, it's there. We're going to be in this for a while, but it's in the transformative aspects of this, because Pluto is a transformer. And I believe this time it's a transformer for collective humanity, because we are exposed to something that one way or another we're going to have to deal with. And I have other focus points, but I don't want to go into that, so you just go ahead with the...
It's interesting doing a chart for an entire country or city. How is that done?
It's done very much the same way that we do a birth chart. We take the time, the birth date, so to speak, of the country or the person or the state. This is a particular chart. It comes out of Nick Campion's book of world horoscopes, and it's a birth chart, the Sibley chart for July 4th, 1776, 5:10 p.m., Philadelphia, PA. And it's the chart of the United States at that particular point in time. And it focuses on the ascendant of our country at that time. If you were to look at this, and any astrologer probably has already done that, and you're probably going to see lots and lots of focuses on this through the year. Our ascendant was 12 Sagittarius. Pluto at that time was 12 Sagittarius. It's right on our ascendant. It's right on our image. It's right on our essence as a country, all of which was damaged by what took place. If we look at our 7th house, which is the house of partnership, but the house of open enemies. The 12th house are the hidden enemies. The 7th house are the open enemies. We see that our country has been and is focusing. Our moon is there, our Jupiter is there, and this is I'm dealing with the transit as it hit our country in that particular day. The moon was in 28 degrees of Gemini. Saturn was in 14 degrees of Gemini, opposite the Sagittarius. So we have Pluto there in Sagittarius. We have Saturn in Gemini, almost in exact opposition. And this is what triggered that response for our country. Okay, there are a lot of other aspects, but this gives us a perspective.
Is there times when those planets are still in opposition such as that and it doesn't give birth to a catastrophe? Or when that happens, is that almost guaranteeing some kind of mayhem? Or
what it's guaranteeing is a change of perspective. Saturn is the established order. Pluto is the transformer.
Okay.
We have transformed this country in many ways. If you look at the emotions that are going out, the hurt, the pain, the anger, the frustration, the reaching out for one another and for our flag, it's an extremely powerful gift to us and to humanity. And I think philosophically, I don't want to get carried away with this, but we have a lot of things to learn from this. And I think we're going to see that coming out as time goes on.
It's, I mean, it's devastating that it takes or it could take something of such catastrophic proportions to make people see how much they need each other and how important it is that people pull together and stick together and stick by their country and reaffirm some nationalism, patriotism. In my lifetime, I really haven't seen a strong nationalism. We read about it, we see it in terms of World War II. This might be the first time since then where you have people actually starting to appreciate what we've had in this country and the very liberties that a lot of us have started to take for granted.
Absolutely, Chris. I think that will be there. And I think also, and I keep going back to this because I think it's going to globally make us aware the fact that we are a world-connected community and that we have to protect, that we have to in whatever way, focus on the positives, the humanity, the heroes of everyday life, which this has certainly made us do.
And absolutely, I can't reiterate enough the valiance and just the honor attached to the people who have come together to aid in this horrible catastrophe. From an astrologer's standpoint, now a question that would probably be posed to you, and it's meant as no disrespect to anybody involved or anybody who's currently missing. At the present time, there have been only 5 survivors found, nobody from the original impact. Do you portend that there will be survivors from this as the rescue efforts continue?
To be honest, Chris, no. If there are going to be a few miracles that come up that somehow are part of this. The miracles are not in that space. If you watch the faces of all the government officials who go there, you look at what they see, and I've been told, or at least I've heard time and time again, you don't know until you've been there. You can't imagine until you've seen it. If you just look at the faces of the people who've been there, we can't by just watching it on television.
No.
And I do hope that there are miracles. But the number, I think, will remain where it is and maybe higher. It's a catastrophic, explosive nature, and it just hits us so strongly.
What do you feel will be the first ramifications of this tragedy for the people of New York, economically, socially? What changes do you think are going to be on the horizon? Because we are all changed by this in some way or other, definitely on the emotional level. I know I'm not the same person that I was before September the 11th. Our crew here, we were talking earlier, all of us are profoundly affected. We kind of feel like we're living surrealistically. Something is different. On a wider scale, what do you portend as those differences, those changes for all of us?
I do believe economically. I mean, this was one of the things that will change our structure. And I don't mean it negatively, because to some degree, because I think our country, the spirit of our country is being called upon. The spirit of the world is being called upon. If you saw beneath the veil the other night, the various focuses on what's going on in Afghanistan itself, and the lives, the horror of the women in that experience. We've got to collectively look at that. We've got to collectively pull together. If you looked at the presentation by all of the stars on television the other night, extraordinary. The beauty, the simplicity of it, it's powerful. The collective world support in many ways. We've never, ever on this planet seen anything like this.
No.
And it isn't the same kind of war. It's a totally different war. And it's going to take more perception, compassion, and insight to get us through it.
Economically, what are some of the factors we can be looking at in the months to come?
I think we're going to, I do believe we're going to rebound from this.
From the stock market's terrible week this week.
I think I don't know that much about stock markets. There are astrologers who really do and are pretty good at it. But as I listen to people talk and as I've heard people that I know who know a little bit about it, there will be a pulling upward, okay? This Saturn-Pluto is another facet that we have to face that does deal economically with our values and how we're going to change and transform them. I think we're going to have some struggles. It's not going to be absolutely easy. But I do think it's going to make us aware that we need to share a little bit more, that we need to build a little different perspective on how we use our material resources. That's Saturn. And I think we're going to have to deal with that.
Okay. In a social sense, what changes do you feel are on the horizon throughout the remainder of the year?
Well, again, we've all been traumatized by this. I think we haven't begun to see the reaction psychologically that people are going to have. They're going to be people who remember it. I know personal friends who, although there were no death in the personal friends, had people there. I know of a 16-year-old girl, the daughter of a friend of mine, who walked away from it just a few minutes before it exploded and had to run. And the trauma that's with people who are in some ways afraid to go out at night, who woke up a few days afterwards with the airplanes and the intensity within themselves. And I think there were a lot of people, I know myself, I know you, and I'm sure others, who had some kind of forecast within their psychic system, but none of us really could totally put it together. And probably it was best that we didn't.
Yeah, I think a large consensus of people who are very creative, artistic, more in tune with their spiritual side. A lot of us over the past year have just felt like we were living in a false sense of peace or security, that something was looming. And you know, sometimes you can't even verbalize it or articulate it, but I felt that for a while. Many people that I've spoken to have shared the opinion also that they just felt something was approaching.
I think you're right. I mean, I can just, again, through the counts of people that in talking with them will say, you know, I saw this, I dreamed this, I felt this. And collectively, we're going to come up with 1,001 stories. It's going to be incredible what we did know, but didn't know how to put a name to it. And it's going to change us all. There's no way about it. It's going to change us all.
What is a way in which astrology can be used to, say, help a person get through this metamorphosis that we're in? And it's more than likely going to be a protracted metamorphosis, like you've said, over the next 2 to 7 years. Is astrology, is the knowledge of ourselves a way of easing us through this in a less painful way?
Absolutely. This too shall pass. And astrology, because it deals with cycles, it deals with movement, it never stops. There are always a continuing set of cycles. We'll come to see how we were hit with this and how we are going to overcome it by our own growth and expansion.
By cycles that you might see are on the horizon, what can it portend in terms of our approach to this now politically, governmentally?
I think we're going to be much more cautious with our own borders. I think we're going to be much more cautious with our sense of indestructibility. And maybe, too, we'll be much more sensitive of all of us as humanity collectively coming together and saying, hey, we've got to reconsider this. Yeah. What do we do? And again, the ultimate is we blow ourselves up and erase the planet, which is the ultimate. But my feeling is that from this will come a strength and a compassion and an understanding of one's fears, anxieties, and limitations that will help one another move us through this.
And perhaps make us realize that spiritually we are all connected.
Absolutely.
It's maybe more of the material leanings that make us, that stratify us, instead of helping us to cohere.
Well, I think I've been rather amazed watching the television again and seeing the people who have donated. I mean, the people in all capacities who have said, here, you take this in millions of dollars sometimes and do what you can with it. And the little kids who went out and gathered buckets of money to take to the Red Cross.
Selling iced tea, lemonade,
everything,
and so forth.
And you can't help, and it wasn't just in our country. The tears shed around the world. I mean, the impact, anybody is vulnerable.
Of course.
This is the mentality that's working against humanity in many ways, and we need to do something about it.
What are some of the things that you feel we can do?
The things that we can do right now is just hold our breath, speak, try to get in a relaxed state and not take our anger out on people who have had nothing to do with this. We can't condemn, and that's part of the anger. I mean, I know myself, I don't consider myself a person who gets angry, but there was that anger in me at one point, too, that wanted to lash out in some way. But I realize we can't.
No.
We've got to reach out and shed some of the boundaries that we've had before.
I may speak somewhat idealistically, but I believe we have to pull together in a network of love, and I think love is the only way that we're going to fight, by all of us sticking together. It's hate that brings events such as this, and fighting that with equal hate, I don't know if that's going to be the answer, because I think that could just be our ruination, ultimately.
We have to take a stand in many ways.
Yeah.
But I think, and I'm hoping that because it has reached the global perspective, that we have to think about it, and that we have to be careful of our anger and regulate. Obviously, whoever planned this, the perpetrators, were very intelligent, very devious, very knowledgeable, and somehow our task as humanity is to say there's more to humanity than this kind of treatment of one another.
Of course.
And as I say, sometimes my anger comes up again when I think about the women in Afghanistan and how they're treated. Yes. And as a woman, I can't help but feel that.
I totally understand. We are approaching the close of our program, and again, I thank you for sharing your great knowledge and wisdom with us. And once again, our heartfelt compassion and sympathies extends to everybody, families, friends, victims involved in this horrible incident. There really are no words that can compensate, but we just want to say God bless America, which up to a couple of weeks ago might have been a corny thing to say. Today, it's a pearl, and God bless you all. Thank you for your wonderful efforts, and thank you for joining us here at Talking About. Good night.